My name is Eleanor Morgan, and every month on the 20th, my husband vanishes without a trace. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started quietly. The first time I thought it was work. Mark came home later than usual. He looked pale, distracted. I asked if everything was all right, and he gave me that practiced smile husbands give when they want to avoid a conversation. "Just a long day," he said. I stopped for gas and ended up helping a guy jump his car. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married 12 years. We had routines: coffee in bed on Saturdays, jazz on Sunday mornings, crossword puzzles before dinner. He was dependable, predictable even. He paid bills on time. He flossed. He ironed his shirts the night before work. But then, it happened again. Exactly 1 month later, on the 20th. He left for work and didn't come home until nearly midnight. No call. No text. Just silence. And then a gentle re-entry. "Sorry I got pulled into a last-minute client dinner," he said, kicking off his shoes. My phone died. That time I felt something. It wasn't suspicion, not yet. Just the sense that something had slipped, that some wire between us had gone loose. But the third time I didn't ask. Because I knew. He left early that morning like always. Kissed me on the cheek. Said he'd be home in time for dinner. I waited until 8 p.m. before calling. No answer. By 11 I was pacing. At 2 a.m. the garage door opened. He came in with a smoothie in his hand like it was any other night. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked surprised. "Yeah, why?" "You didn't answer your phone." I thought he waved a hand. "I left it in the car." "Sorry. I'm fine." That's when I started the list. A small notebook I kept in my nightstand. Disappearance log. That's what I wrote on the first page. April 20th, gone 16 hours. Returned calm. No receipt in wallet. May 20th, phone left at home. Said it died. Smelled like soap. Not our soap. June 20th, left work early. Didn't return until 3 a.m. It wasn't just the disappearances. It was how normal he acted afterward. How he slipped back into routines without hesitation. How he never seemed tired. How his clothes were always neatly pressed, unwrinkled, as though he'd changed somewhere in between. One night I tried something petty. I sewed a tiny red thread into the sleeve of his coat. It was barely visible, tucked into the seam. When he came home hours late, I checked. The thread was gone. He claimed he'd just gone to a friend's house to watch a game. I nodded and wrote it down. The notebook grew thick. By September, I knew his pattern better than I knew my own heartbeat. Leave early. No phone. No contact. Return just past midnight, sometimes later, with vague excuses and that same blank-eyed calm. Always on the 20th. Not the 19th. Not the 21st. The 20th. I stopped confronting him. I stopped asking. Instead, I watched. People think betrayal comes with shouting matches, with lipstick on collars, with credit card charges and perfume in the air. But Mark betrayed me with routine, with disappearing just enough to leave me questioning everything but not enough to prove anything. And that's what broke me. Not the lying, the precision. On October 20th, I made a decision. I kissed him goodbye that morning, packed his lunch like always, and watched his car pull out of the driveway. Then I followed him. Not closely. Not in a movie scene kind of way. I waited 5 minutes, then took the back roads. He didn't take the highway. He took a turn onto a road I didn't recognize, rural, tree-lined out past the city's edge. I lost him somewhere near a gas station. Waited. Circled. Nothing. When I returned home, the trunk of his car was open slightly. He'd forgotten to close it fully. Inside, tucked beside his gym bag, was a folded gray blanket, a crushed water bottle, and a single red thread. Not the one I'd sewn. a different one, thicker, from a scarf maybe, or something else. I held it in my fingers like it was a fuse ready to explode. I didn't say a word when he came home that night, but I opened the notebook, and I wrote. October 20th followed him. Lost trail. Red thread in trunk. Not mine. He's hiding something. And next time, I'm not just following. I'm catching him. People underestimate what silence can do to a marriage. It's not the silence of forgetting to say goodnight or skipping small talk after dinner, it's the silence that grows roots. The kind that replaces trust with observation. That's where Mark and I were now. I no longer listened to his words. I watched his hands. I noted how he placed his keys on the counter at the exact same angle every night. How he folded his sleeves twice at the wrist but never adjusted them after. How he reached for the same mug in the morning even though he claimed not to care which one. After October 20th, I began to live in that silence. I cooked dinner as usual, but I recorded everything on my phone, my own conversations, his footsteps the exact minute he entered the door. I knew it sounded paranoid, but paranoia is just pattern recognition that no one else believes in. Mark was kind, affectionate, always present except when he wasn't. The scariest part was how much I wanted to believe in his goodness even as I documented his deception. I didn't want to be right, because if I was right then, the man I had built my life around was a stranger. On November 18th, 2 days before the next event, he bought flowers. He never bought flowers. They weren't for me. He handed them to a neighbor on her birthday. But still, I made a note. He polished his shoes that night, pressed his pants himself, something he never did, always preferring the dry cleaner. And that night, as we brushed our teeth side by side, I caught him watching himself in the mirror with a look I didn't recognize. Not vanity, anticipation. He caught me looking, smiled, kissed me on the cheek. "Early meeting tomorrow," he said. I know I replied. "You're leaving at 6, right?" He paused. Right. It was already rehearsed. He didn't blink. On the morning of November 20th, I didn't follow him. I watched him. I took the day off from school. Told the office I wasn't feeling well. I pulled the small security camera I'd hidden behind the bookshelf a week earlier and checked its feed on my laptop. 2:06 a.m. Mark walked past it like a ghost. Calm, precise. No phone, no backpack, no wallet. Just his coat, his keys, and that same unblinking expression. I replayed it 3 times. Same pace, same body language, same stillness. Then I checked his sock drawer. Taped under the wooden slats was a flash drive. My breath hitched as I peeled it off. It felt warm in my palm. I plugged it into my laptop, heart pounding. It contained one folder, labeled Witness. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside a single video, 5 minutes long. The screen was dark at first, then shaky footage of Mark filming himself in what looked like a motel room. His voice was low. "I'm leaving this in case something happens to me," he said. I froze. "This isn't a confession. It's insurance." He swallowed. "I know how this looks. I know Ellie will start asking questions. I've tried to protect her from it. From him. But I'm out of time. If you're watching this, Ellie, it means I couldn't keep the wall up anymore." He looked straight into the camera. "There's something I've never told you. Something that comes back every 20th. And I thought I could outrun it. But I was wrong." The screen went black. I stared at it, willing more footage to play. A clue. A face. A name. Nothing. Just that final sentence. "Every 20th it comes for me." I sat in the dark, the only light coming from my laptop, and felt my breath curl up my throat like frost. I didn't know whether to be angry or terrified. He'd known I'd search. Had left that message for me. And yet, still he disappeared. Still he came home without a scratch and kissed me like nothing happened. That night I pretended to sleep as he returned at 2:47 a.m. He slipped into bed beside me, didn't speak, didn't touch me, but I felt it something off in his breathing, like he'd run a marathon and was pretending he hadn't. I kept my eyes closed, my pulse deafening, and I knew. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't a second family or a hidden addiction. This was something else. The next morning, he made pancakes, laughed at the news, kissed me goodbye like nothing had changed. But it had. Because now I knew he wasn't hiding a lie. He was hiding a curse. I couldn't get the word out of my head. Curse. It sounded ridiculous in daylight. Like a superstition someone says half-jokingly in a bar. But in the quiet after midnight, after watching that video, it felt real. Mark hadn't said he was in trouble. He'd said something comes for him. What kind of man uses a word like that? I spent the next week in a fog. During class, I caught myself losing track of lessons, watching the shadows outside the windows, startled by the sound of bells. At home, I studied Mark's face while he ate cereal, searching for some flicker of recognition that I knew something to break the performance. But he gave me nothing. On Saturday, I finally opened the drawer in his office I had always avoided. The locked one. The one he told me was just for bills and junk. The lock wasn't hard to pick. I found the instructions online. A bent paperclip, and 15 minutes later, it clicked. Inside was a worn leather-bound calendar. I expected receipts. Maybe an ID with a fake name. A key to something I didn't recognize. Instead, I found time. Every page was marked by the same thing, a symbol, a simple triangle inside a circle. Always on the 20th. No words. Just that. From years back. Even before we met. It took my breath away. December 20th, a triangle. January 20th, a triangle. Over and over again. There was no name, no explanation. But when I ran my finger across the pen marks, I felt something strange. A slight indentation on the 20th of each month, as if he pressed harder on those days. As if the mark wasn't just a note. It was a scar. That night, I confronted him. Not with anger. With ice. I poured 2 glasses of wine, sat down across from him at the kitchen table, and slid the calendar between us. He looked at it and froze. Didn't blink. Didn't reach for it. "What's this?" I asked quietly. He swallowed. "Where did you get that?" Answer the question mark. He didn't move. "It's nothing," he said at last. "You've been marking the 20th for years. This didn't start recently. You've been disappearing long before me. Before we met. Before the house. Before the dog. Before us." Silence. "I want to know the truth." He looked down. "I don't think you do. That's not your choice anymore." He closed his eyes. And for a brief second I thought I saw its shame curling through him like a breeze through autumn leaves. "I was 17, he began. "The first time it happened." "What happened?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, grabbed the calendar, and dropped it in the sink. Turned on the tap. "Mark," I cried. "What are you?" He looked at me then. For the first time, really looked. "It's not something you can fix, Ellie," he said, voice shaking. "It's not something that ends because you ask questions. It follows me. No matter where I go. No matter who I marry." The calendar bled ink down the drain. "What is it?" I whispered. He turned his back. "I told you once. In the video. I left that for you because I knew one day I'd be gone for good. And I wanted you to stop looking." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving the sink running, leaving me drowning in the sound of water and lies. That night I didn't sleep. I replayed his words over and over. It follows me, no matter where I go. It wasn't just about a woman. It wasn't about crime or cheating. It was something he believed in, something he feared. And he'd been marking it for decades. Why hadn't I seen this sooner? Why had I married a man with so many shadows? Because he was kind. Because he made me laugh. Because he remembered the names of my coworkers and bought me those ridiculous socks I liked. Because some monsters wear smiles, and some ghosts carry groceries. The next morning he was gone. Not in a violent way. Just gone. His coat missing. His phone left behind. His car still in the garage. No note. No goodbye. And it wasn't the 20th. It was the 6th. A chill passed through me so violently I had to grip the edge of the sink, because now the rules had changed. It was no longer monthly. It was whenever it wanted. I didn't call the police. I told myself it was because I didn't want to raise alarm, that Mark would walk back through the door in a few hours the way he always did, with that same gentle voice saying something about forgetting his keys or needing a walk to clear his head. But deep down I knew he wasn't coming back. Not like before. Not this time. I stood in our kitchen staring at the outline of his coffee cup on the table still there from yesterday, faint like a watermark of someone who only ever existed in soft focus. His phone was still on the counter. That was the strangest part. Mark never left his phone behind. He treated it like a lifeline. Even on his 20th vanishings, he'd always had it turned off or dead, but not missing. I turned it on. No password. I wasn't sure if that was comforting or damning. Inside, nothing unusual, no missed calls, no strange apps. But in his notes folder, there was one new entry timestamped from just 2 hours earlier. Just 5 words. Don't trust what looks familiar. My stomach dropped. What did that even mean? A warning, a threat. Or was he talking about me? That night, I wandered the house like it was unfamiliar. Every floorboard sounded louder. Every clock ticked with menace. I couldn't even look at the calendar without feeling nauseous. I started imagining the triangle symbol burned into every page. At 2:06 a.m., I woke with a start. The house was silent. Too silent. I crept down the hall to his office, hoping irrationally that he'd be there, that I'd find him at his desk working late, pretending the past few days hadn't happened. But there was no one. Instead, I found something else. A drawer slightly ajar. I don't know why I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe because I'd been so focused on that locked drawer, the calendar, the flash drive. But this drawer, it had been used recently. Papers slightly shifted, dust disturbed. Inside a box of old photos, mostly childhood ones. Mark as a boy grinning in front of a lake. Mark holding a fish nearly as long as his arm. Mark with 2 other children I didn't recognize, one girl, one boy, both slightly older, both solemn-faced. And then I saw it. The back of the photo. In Mark's handwriting, Woods, June 20th. The day it started. My hands trembled. Because that date, June 20th, lined up with the very first triangle in the calendar he burned. I flipped through the rest of the box. More photos, some recent, some ancient, but always, always something tied to the 20th. And then buried at the bottom a small envelope. No name, no return address. Inside it, a single photo. Of me, taken from across the street. Our house in the background. My face half in shadow. Not a selfie, not from Mark's phone. Taken by someone else. The timestamp on the back. Last month, November 20th. I didn't know who to trust anymore. I tried to call my sister, but her line went straight to voicemail. Tried my best friend Rachel, busy signal. Even the neighbors seemed off. Too quiet. Their porch lights off at unusual times. Their blinds drawn during daylight. It was like someone had turned the whole world 1 degree to the left. Familiar, but not. Mark's words echoed in my mind. Don't trust what looks familiar. What did he mean? Me, them, himself? Or the house? The neighborhood? Or maybe the idea of him? The man I had slept beside, laughed with, cried with. Maybe even that was the deception. What if nothing had ever been real? The next day, I made my decision. I went to the police. I brought the photo of me, the calendar photo. I left out the flash drive, the strange note, the talk of something coming. I knew how it would sound. Even stripped down, it sounded thin. The officer, young, polite, vaguely bored, took my statement. He asked if Mark had any known enemies, any history of drug use, any medical conditions. I said no, because that was true. As far as I knew, they filed a report, gave me a case number, and told me to stay hopeful. I walked out of the precinct colder than when I walked in, because hope wasn't going to find him. Whatever had taken Mark, whether it was a person, a choice, or something else entirely, hope was useless against it. Only truth could find him. And I wasn't sure I even believed in that anymore. I stopped sleeping in our bedroom. It was too quiet, too hollow. The scent of Mark's pillow made my stomach twist, not from grief, but from unanswered questions. So I moved to the guest room downstairs, curled under the old quilt my mother had made, and tried to breathe, without imagining him knocking on the door, smiling, saying, "What are you doing down here?" But he didn't come back. Not on the 6th, not on the 20th, not on any day in between. The police never followed up, and I stopped expecting them to. What I did expect was something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it forming. A shadow just behind the edges of logic. I wasn't looking for Mark anymore. I was looking for the truth that took him. And it wasn't hiding in the usual places. On December 18th, I took the keys to his car. It had sat untouched in the garage for nearly 2 weeks, collecting dust on the windshield like the world had already moved on from him. But something told me to check it again. Not the glove compartment, not under the seats, the trunk. The last time I'd looked, I'd found the red thread. This time, I found something else. A thin folder, inside a map, worn frayed at the edges, with a single place circled in red miles away from town just past the state forest, and a name written in capital letters beneath the circle, Bellingham Cove. It sounded fictional, like something from a paperback mystery novel, a cursed lake, or a hidden town. But when I searched online, it was real. A lake with no town, no street address, just a sliver of forgotten geography nestled in the woods, abandoned after a landslide decades ago. Some hikers passed through, but no one lived there. Not anymore. I checked my phone. December 20th was 2 days away. The itch at the back of my neck returned, something primal, warning vibrating. Whatever happened to Mark started there. And maybe it was still waiting for him to return. I packed a bag, camera, flashlight, notebook, a printed photo of Mark, protein bars, pepper spray. Not because I thought I'd need it, but because going anywhere unarmed now felt like a death sentence. I didn't tell anyone I was going. There wasn't anyone to tell. I just left a note on the fridge, gone for the day. Don't wait up. The irony hit me halfway down the highway. Now I was the one vanishing. Bellingham Cove wasn't easy to find. The road narrowed after the last gas station. Cell signal dropped to 0. GPS lost its mind trying to reroute me in circles. Eventually, I had to ditch the car and hike the final half-mile through brush and ankle-high snow. When I arrived, it was nothing like I expected. No lake, just a depression in the land long since dried up. Cracked mud, fallen branches, and a faint iron-like smell that stuck to my teeth. I checked the map again. This was it. And in the center of the former lakebed, half buried in mud and thyme, was a bench. Just a plain wooden bench. Unnatural. Placed. I approached slowly, every step crunching under me like bones. On the bench was a small object, wrapped in black cloth. Neat, intentional. I picked it up and unwrapped it. Inside a silver locket. I opened it. 2 photos. One of Mark Young, maybe in his early 20s. And the other, a girl, no older than 12. Freckles. Eyes like his. My hand started to shake, because I'd never seen her before. And something in me whispered, that's why he ran. I sat on the bench for hours, waiting for something to happen. For the wind to shift. For a shadow to move. For a voice to whisper from the trees. But nothing did. Only silence. Still, I wrote everything in my notebook. Time of arrival. Temperature. Landmarks. smells, feelings, even the birds or lack thereof. And then, just before dusk, I turned around to leave and saw it. A mark carved into the tree behind the bench. A triangle inside a circle. Same as the calendar. Fresh. No moss, no weathering. New. Not from 20 years ago. Not from one of his teenage summers. From this month. I drove home with the locket in my coat pocket. And with it, a new question. Mark hadn't just been running from a threat. He was returning to someone he'd once protected. Or maybe failed to. And now, I was part of it. Because I had touched the locket. Because I had seen the mark. Because I looked. When I got home, the hallway light was on. I hadn't left it on. It was a small detail, small enough that most people would dismiss it, blame it on memory exhaustion habit. But not me. Not now. Not after the locket. Not after Bellingham Cove. Not after the mark. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, keys clenched in my hand, heart thudding behind my ribs like a warning drum. Then I stepped inside. Everything was where I left it. The shoes by the door. The blanket folded neatly on the couch. The dishes still drying in the rack. But the silence was too neat. Like someone had cleaned up after themselves. I walked slowly through the house. Nothing in the bedroom. Nothing in the office. Nothing in the guest room. Then I reached the kitchen and saw it. The calendar. Hung perfectly on the fridge just as I'd left it. But something had changed. There on the new page for December, written in Mark's unmistakable handwriting, "Do not follow the thread." That was all. No greeting, no explanation, no signature. Just that. A single warning left not in fear but certainty. And beneath it, in faint pencil marks, a new triangle in a circle, drawn under the date January 20th. The next one. He was planning for the next one. Even now. Even gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that calendar, replaying everything in my head like a detective trying to find the missing frame of a film reel. The locket, the girl, the carving. Do not follow the thread. But I had already followed it. Hadn't I, from his car to the trunk? From the trunk to the map? From the map to the lake? From the lake to the locket? And now the thread was wrapped around me, tight, invisible, unrelenting. The next morning, I called the police again. I told them about Bellingham Cove. I said I'd found evidence that might be connected to Mark's disappearance. They sent someone over, an officer I hadn't met yet. Younger than me, soft-spoken. His name was Clark. He listened carefully, took notes, asked the right questions. But the moment I mentioned the triangle symbol, his pen stopped. Just for a second. It was quick. But I noticed. "Something wrong?" I asked. He looked up too quickly. "No. Just making sure I got that part right. Have you seen it before?" I asked. He hesitated. "No," he lied. "I didn't press. Not yet." But I made a note of it the moment he left. That night, I reviewed the hallway security camera, the one I'd hidden weeks ago behind the coat rack. I'd almost forgotten about it in the chaos. I clicked through the recordings, fast-forwarded through static empty rooms, shifting light, until I hit December 20th, just before midnight. Mark hadn't come home, but someone had. The footage was grainy, the lighting dim, but the timestamp didn't lie. 12:42 a.m. A shadow moved through the hallway. Not walking, sliding. It passed directly in front of the camera, smooth, deliberate. A tall figure, cloaked face hidden in darkness, but not unfamiliar, because just as it moved past, something flashed beneath its coat. A thin silver chain, a locket. My heart froze. It had been inside the house, not Mark. The next morning, the locket was gone. I checked my coat pocket, the nightstand, the car. Gone. Like it had never existed. I wanted to scream. Instead, I wrote in my notebook. The thread is no longer something I'm following, It's pulling me now. And whatever waits at the other end knows my name. I started dreaming in static. Every night for a week, I'd fall asleep for what felt like only minutes before waking in a cold sweat heart, racing images dissolving before I could grab hold of them. But one piece stayed the same. A woman, standing in the distance, holding a black umbrella. She never moved, never spoke. But somehow in the dream, I knew she was watching me, not Mark. Me. And the strangest part? It never rained. Not in the dream. Not in real life. Not once since Mark had disappeared. It wasn't just dreams, though. Things started going missing. Small things. A spoon. One earring. A single page from my notebook, the entry from December 20th, the night I returned from Bellingham Cove. At first, I thought I was losing it. Stress. Fatigue. Paranoia. But deep down, I knew. Someone was inside the house. Not just once. Repeatedly. Whoever or whatever had been drawn to Mark's pattern was now inside mine. So I did what I should have done weeks ago. I left the house. I booked a room at the Red Pine Motel just off the old highway, cheap, anonymous, empty. No ID required. Paid cash. I brought only a backpack and the essentials: my notebook, 2 disposable phones, a burner laptop, the spare camera I'd hidden in the attic. I set up surveillance, pointed one camera toward the motel lot, one toward my room door. I didn't expect to sleep. I just needed to reset. To think without being watched. But even there it followed me. Not physically, visually. On the second night, while reviewing the hallway footage from home via my laptop, I saw her. Not clearly, just a brief flash. A figure on the porch. Holding a black umbrella. At night. With no rain. She never knocked. Never moved. Just stood there perfectly still for exactly 3 minutes and 44 seconds. Then turned and walked away. Backwards. As if she knew the camera was watching. As if she wanted me to see her leave. I printed the frame. Pinned it to the motel's corkboard. I stared at it every hour. It was a blur, yes, but not a blur of movement. A blur of identity. The image refused to resolve. And then it clicked. Not only was she watching me, I had seen her before. In the photo from Mark's closet, the one buried under the old memories, the one where he stood beside a girl and a woman with the exact same umbrella. Only now she hadn't aged. Not a single line, not a single change in posture. Like a statue, or a portrait that moves. I left the motel the next morning and drove downtown. There was one more place I hadn't looked. One person I hadn't spoken to. The last name on an old letter I'd found inside the box of photos, barely legible, faded in pencil. Mrs. Florence Andrell. No address, no context, but the name stuck with me. I searched city records, phone listings, historical archives, and finally I found it. She wasn't local. She was 2 counties over, living in a private nursing facility. 94 years old. Former archivist. No family. I didn't call ahead. I just drove. The nurse led me to a small garden room in the back. A woman sat alone in a wheelchair, wrapped in a shawl despite the sun. Her eyes were pale but sharp. "Mrs. Andrell?" I asked. She looked up slowly. "You have his eyes?" she said. My breath caught. "Whose?" She didn't answer. So I sat, pulled the printed photo of the umbrella woman from my coat. "This woman," I said, "was in a photo with my husband. Years ago. And now she's outside my house. She hasn't aged. She watches. She doesn't speak." "Do you know her?" Mrs. Andrell nodded just once. "Everyone has a watcher," she said softly, "but most never see them. Only those marked. Marked how her hand shook as she raised it and pointed to my chest. By inheritance. Or by choice. I don't understand." She cut me off. "You followed the thread." I froze. "What?" "You followed it," she whispered. "That's what brings them. Not belief. Not blood. Curiosity." She leaned in closer. And once you follow it, it follows you back. I left without asking more. What was the point? I already knew what she meant. I had touched Mark's secrets, held them in my hands, opened every drawer, stepped into every shadow, and now I had invited it. Whatever it was, whatever she was. And I had a feeling. On January 20th, I'd meet her face to face. I returned home on January 15th. Not because it felt safe, because it felt necessary. Every instinct in me screamed to stay away. But there's something about unfinished patterns that gnaw at the mind more than fear ever could. I needed to see what the house had become without me in it. Or more accurately, what it had become with her. I opened the door slowly. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The kitchen was spotless, shoes aligned. Even the mail had been collected and stacked neatly on the counter. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving. No one had the key. Except Mark. But Mark was gone. Wasn't he? I walked through each room in silence, my heart pounding like footsteps in my ears. The hallway camera was gone. So was the calendar. And in its place on the fridge, affixed with a single magnet, was a Polaroid. I approached it with trembling fingers. It was a photo of the bench at Bellingham Cove. But now it was empty. No trees, no mud, no lake bed. Just endless white fog. And in the corner of the photo, handwritten in thin black ink, "See you soon." I nearly left again. Nearly slammed the door and drove without looking back. But then I remembered something. The house Mark went to. The one I followed him to back in October. The one he entered smiling in a way I'd never seen him smile with me. I'd never gone back. I didn't even know the address. I'd only seen the neighborhood in passing. But now I needed to see what was behind that door. I drove there the next morning. Block by block, I retraced my route. And finally, I found it. Same house, same peeling shutters, same crooked mailbox with no numbers. But something had changed. The windows were boarded up, the driveway covered in leaves. It looked abandoned, like it had been empty for years. I parked and walked slowly to the porch. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked. Still nothing. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Taped beneath the mailbox, nearly hidden from view, was a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out. No envelope. No seal. Just one page. It was a letter, addressed to me, in Mark's handwriting. "Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I've failed. Again. I never wanted you involved. I thought I could keep you on the edges, safe, clean, unaware. I was wrong. You always see too much. You always notice." It started at Bellingham Cove. I was 17. There were 3 of us, me, my sister, and her friend. We thought we'd found a place no one knew, a place no one watched. But someone did. The woman came out of the water, umbrella open. No rain. We ran. My sister didn't. The next 20th she came for me. And every month since. I've bargained, traded days, traded versions of myself. You've seen them. You've felt them. I was never whole. I don't think I ever will be again. Please, Ellie, don't follow the thread. She doesn't kill. She remembers. And soon, you will too. M. I folded the letter with numb fingers. The cold seeped into my skin like guilt. I stared at the boarded windows and wondered how many times he'd come here to beg to vanish, to become someone else just to keep her at bay. I had spent years trying to understand him. But now I realized he hadn't been living with a secret. He had been the secret. That night, back at the house, I didn't lock the doors. I sat in the hallway, lights off, waiting. I wanted to see her. Not on a screen. Not in a photo. Face to face. If this was going to end, it would end with truth. At 2:06 a.m., the porch light flickered, and I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate. Then, a knock. 3 soft taps. I rose and opened the door. There she stood, umbrella in hand, rainless, motionless, but closer than ever. Her face was pale eyes dark as oil, no malice, no warmth, just stillness like a memory that never moved on. "Who are you?" I asked barely above a whisper. She tilted her head and for the first time spoke. "You know me," she said. Her voice wasn't threatening. It was familiar. Too familiar. And in that moment I remembered something I had forgotten for years. A childhood trip. A lake. A bench. A photo I never took. Her. She'd been watching me long before Mark ever disappeared. She didn't move. Neither did I. We stood like 2 statues on opposite sides of a threshold, her silhouette framed by moonlight umbrella and hand eyes locked onto mine. She was still. Preternaturally still. Not a single flicker of expression crossed her face. Even her coat didn't shift in the cold breeze. It was as if she existed outside of time itself, like a photograph that had wandered into the real world. "You know me," she said. The words didn't echo. They landed like a whisper directly in my chest. And the horrifying thing was, she was right. Not by name, not by memory, but by something older, deeper. Recognition without understanding. A buried ache that now stretched, cracked, and clawed its way up through my ribs. A vault opened in my mind. I saw myself at 10 years old, crouched beside the edge of a lake I'd forgotten existed. My hair tied back in a loose ponytail, eyes squinting against the late afternoon sun as I tried to catch dragonflies on the reeds. I could hear my father's voice calling from the trees, playful, distant. And behind me, in the reflection of the water, her. She had been standing in the shadows. The same woman. Same umbrella. Same unmoving stance. Only I hadn't turned around. I hadn't dared. Now I had. "You were there," I said aloud, my voice breaking. She nodded. Not slowly. Not meaningfully. Just acknowledging. A quiet confirmation that struck harder than a scream. "What do you want from me?" She didn't answer. Her face didn't twitch. Her body didn't shift. But something in the air did. It grew heavier. Denser. Like pressure closing and thickening between my skin and my bones. A silent tension that pressed into my skull. Then with a single deliberate motion she raised her hand and pointed. Not at me. Behind me. I turned. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied. And there, placed gently on the floor at the base of the stairs, was a box. It hadn't been there before. Wrapped neatly in pale gray cloth corners, sharp edges precise. Intentional. When I looked back to the door, she was gone. No sound of footsteps. No rustling of wind. Just gone. Like she'd only ever existed to deliver something. I stared at the box for several long minutes, afraid to touch it. As if opening it would confirm that this wasn't madness, that something had truly crossed into my life, into me. Eventually, I moved closer. Knelt down. Hands trembling, I unwrapped the cloth. The fabric was cold, as though it had been sitting outside in winter air for hours, maybe days. Inside the box were 3 things. The first, a VHS tape. No label. No markings. The second, a necklace. My mother's locket, the one I'd lost as a child at the very lake from my memory. The one my parents said was just gone, like the entire trip had been reduced to fog and fable. I hadn't seen it in 25 years. The third, a photograph of me and Mark. But the photo had been torn in half. My half remained my image, smiling faintly, hand resting on Mark's shoulder. But his half, ripped clean. Surgically almost. Removed. Erased. I clutched the locket with shaking fingers. The metal bit into my palm like ice. I opened it slowly. Still the same inside, a tiny photo of my mother on one side and a pressed blue flower on the other. But the flower was brittle now. Withered, darkened with time. a message, a link. She hadn't just been watching Mark. She'd been watching me, all along. And worse, she knew I'd forgotten. She knew. The VHS tape sat on the floor like a dare, a relic from a time before streaming, before surveillance, before I had words for fear like this. I didn't even own a VCR anymore, but I remembered the one Mark refused to throw out, buried in the attic along with our old college tech in a box labeled just in case. I climbed into the attic with a flashlight and dusted off the machine, plugged it into the basement TV, inserted the tape. At first static, the kind that hissed and clawed at your ears. Then the screen cleared. Home video quality. Grainy, unsteady. And there me, 10 years old. Laughing, running through tall grass, a forest behind me. Someone followed with the camera calling my name. The voice sounded young. Male. Mark couldn't be. The timeline didn't match. He would have been barely 20. But there he was in the footage. Behind me. Chasing me. Both of us smiling, playing, like we'd always known each other. And then, the camera shifted, turned away from us, zoomed in on a figure standing at the tree line. Her, umbrella open, face obscured, still. The screen held on her for 5, no, maybe 10 full seconds. Too long. Long enough to burn the image into my retinas. Then black. Just black. I sat in the dark, remote in my hand, breath shallow. Not crying, not screaming, just processing. She hadn't just haunted us. She'd recorded us. Not just watched, but archived. And someone, maybe her, maybe someone else, had kept this tape for decades. Why now? Why return it now? Because the thread was tightening. Because I had pulled it too far. I spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table, the photo and the locket spread out in front of me. I flipped through my notebook, tracing symbols, scribbling questions. The tape, the necklace, the image. They weren't just memories. They were instructions. Breadcrumbs to somewhere I hadn't been since childhood. Not Bellingham Cove. The other lake. The one in my dream. The one I'd buried so deep my mind refused to speak its name. I dug through old school records, family photos, summer camp forms, until I found it. Pine Hollow Reserve, County Forest, decommissioned, closed 20 years ago after reports of unexplained environmental degradation. That phrase chilled me, because I knew what it really meant. They didn't know how to explain it. So they buried it. That's what they always do. They bury what they're afraid of. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't chasing Mark's disappearance. I was chasing my own origin. I had 5 days left until January 20th. And now I knew exactly where I had to be. I arrived at Pine Hollow on January 19th, one day before everything would either collapse or become clear. The drive was silent. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even open the windows. I let the road stretch out like a final breath, and I inhaled every mile of it. The sign for Pine Hollow was still there, half hidden by overgrown weeds and caked in rust. The lettering had faded to almost nothing, but I recognized the shape of it, the lean of the crooked posts. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the back seat of a different car, warning me not to wander too close to the lake. But I had wandered. I always wandered. The gate was warped and hung open like a broken jaw. No locks, no guards, just abandonment. I parked near the edge of the woods and stared at the trees. They looked taller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just gotten smaller. The path down to the lake had nearly disappeared. Each step forward felt like a pull downward, not just into the earth, but into something much older, much more familiar than memory. Pine needles scattered like forgotten thoughts. Roots twisted up like fingers warning me to go back. I didn't. I couldn't. The deeper I went, the less the world behind me seemed real. The weight of the air changed. Heavier. Like walking through a dream someone else had created just for me. When I finally reached the clearing, time stopped. It was just as I remembered. The lake was a hollow now, a wide sunken basin lined with pale mud and dead grass. The water had long since receded or been swallowed whole, but I could still smell it like iron and rotting leaves like old secrets. And there she was, standing at the edge right in front of the bench, umbrella open, facing the emptiness, waiting. I wanted to call out, but no sound came. I wanted to run, but my feet knew better. I approached slowly, not as a threat, not even as a guest, but as someone who had finally accepted they were never the one doing the watching. 10 feet away, I stopped. She still didn't turn. But she spoke. "You were always going to come back." Her voice wasn't eerie, it was familiar, like something I'd heard in lullabies or in the pause between my mother's words. "I didn't remember," I said. "You did. You just chose not to look." She finally turned, and I stumbled back a step. It wasn't just that her face resembled mine, it was the timing of it. Like she wore my expression from 5 minutes ago. Like she was the echo I didn't know I was casting. "What are you?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She studied me with those deep, dark eyes that didn't glint, didn't shift, just absorbed. "You broke the thread when you were a child," she said. "You looked too long, too deep." A memory flickered behind my eyes. I was kneeling by the lake alone while my family picnicked far behind. I remember tossing a rock into the water, watching the ripples distort my reflection. And then, I leaned closer. I had seen her in the reflection. Not behind me, not beside me, inside me. "You whispered my name," she said now. "I don't remember doing that. You weren't supposed to. That's what makes it binding." My knees weakened. I sat on the bench too numb to fear. "So you've been following me ever since," she shook her head. "You've been following me." I looked down and saw something lying beside me. A journal. The same moss-green leather cover I'd seen in a dream once, or maybe a memory. The binding frayed, the corners soft with age. My name was carved into it. Not written. Carved. I opened it slowly. Page after page of my handwriting filled the interior. But I had never written any of this. These weren't journals I'd kept. They were records of things I hadn't even known had happened. The night my mother woke screaming from a dream. The time Mark found me sleepwalking at 3 a.m. whispering the word thread. The story my aunt had once told me about a family curse we laughed off at dinner. All there, all real, all remembered. Except by me. The last page was blank. I looked up. She was closer now. The umbrella was lowered at her side. "The thread ends here," she said. I swallowed hard. "So this is it. This is where I disappear." "No," she said. "This is where you choose. Choose what to forget again, or to tie a new thread." I stared at the blank page. "I don't want to forget." "Then you'll have to remember all of it, even what I lost. Especially that." Tears welled up hot and unwanted. "What about Mark?" I asked. "Did I pull him into this? Did I?" She cut me off gently. "He tied himself to you. That was his choice. But love doesn't untie knots. It only tightens them. Did he know he knew enough?" A breeze moved through the clearing. The umbrella fluttered once. I suddenly realized she was no longer a stranger. I had known her all my life. She was every moment I didn't understand. Every shadow I ignored. Every pattern I chose not to see. She was what waited. "I'm not the same person anymore," I whispered. She nodded. "Good. That's how you survive it." I held the journal to my chest, feeling its weight like history, like proof. Then I pulled out a pen from my coat pocket and began to write. Not what had happened. What would. Not what I feared. What I chose. When I finally looked up, she was gone. No dramatic exit. No sound. No trace. Just gone. And in her absence, the clearing felt warmer. Not safe. Not comforting. Just real. I wasn't done. I was only now beginning. I stood from the bench and closed the journal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't following the thread. I was the thread. And wherever it went next, I would be the one tying it. I returned home just after midnight on January 20th. The house greeted me with silence, but it wasn't the same kind of silence I'd come to fear. This time, it was expectant. Like the walls were holding their breath with me, I carried the green journal pressed tightly to my chest. I hadn't let go of it the entire drive. I kept it on the passenger seat like a co-pilot, as though losing sight of it even for a moment might make the truth evaporate. Everything inside me felt rearranged. Not healed, unlocked. Like someone had opened a window that had been nailed shut my whole life. But I also knew what tonight was. The 20th. And whatever Mark had endured on each 20th, whatever thread had looped him into vanishing, was now circling back to me. I turned on every light in the house. I didn't want shadows. Not tonight. I laid the journal open on the kitchen table, its final page now covered in my words, my own handwriting this time. A declaration, not a prayer, not a question, a claim. I made tea, but didn't drink it. I paced the hallway. I checked the front door 3 times, even though I knew no lock would keep her out if she wanted in. But that's not how she worked, was it? She didn't enter. She waited. At 2:06 a.m. I heard it. A soft tapping. Not the door. The window above the sink. 3 deliberate knocks, like someone reminding you they were never really gone. I walked over and pulled the curtain aside. No one there. But on the sill, a photograph. New. I opened the window and reached out for it. It was warm, freshly printed. A Polaroid. I looked at it carefully, expecting to see the familiar bench at the lake, or her umbrella, or Mark's back turned. But this was something different. This was me, sitting at the kitchen table, writing in the journal, from outside the house. My breath caught. The timestamp on the photo read, 1:37 a.m., 30 minutes ago. She had already been here, already watching, already recording. The hair on my arms rose in unison. She didn't need to knock. She never had. She wanted me to know she was here. The hallway light flickered again. Only this time, I didn't flinch. I turned slowly. And there he was. Mark. Standing at the top of the stairs. Looking like he hadn't aged a day since the last time I saw him. Still in that soft gray sweater I always hated, the one he claimed was lucky. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ellie," he said softly. I should have cried. I should have run to him. But instead I stood perfectly still. Because part of me knew. This wasn't a return. This was a choice. His or hers? I wasn't sure yet. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I never really left," he said. "Not all of me." My fingers tightened around the photo in my hand. "This isn't real," I whispered. He took a step down. "It's as real as the journal, as real as the lake, as real as what you saw." Another step. "Don't," I said. But I didn't move away. Because I didn't know what would happen if I rejected him, or what would happen if I believed him. He reached the last step. "I missed you." That was what broke me. The familiarity of it. The softness in his voice. The exact tone he'd used when we reconciled after our worst fight years ago, the one about his mother's will. The way he'd said it while sitting across from me in a parking lot, tears in his eyes. This wasn't Mark mimicking Mark. This was a memory, wrapped in skin, stitched together by longing, by her. I turned and walked into the kitchen. I sat back down at the table, opened the journal again. Mark followed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I knew what he was waiting for. He wanted me to forget again. To shut the book. To close the thread. To let it all become fog once more. I stared at the empty cup of tea. At the ticking clock. At the page. Then I looked up at him, and I said it. No. He blinked. Just once. But it was enough to show me something inside him shifted. Like the illusion cracked just slightly. No, he echoed. I reached for the pen, and without breaking eye contact, I began to write again. A new page. More words. My words. The moment I started, he stepped back. One pace, then another. I kept writing. Every truth, every fear, every memory, even the ones I didn't want. Especially those. And with each word I etched into the page, the house got quieter. Still. Until finally I looked up. And he was gone. Not vanished in a poof of smoke. Just gone. Like he'd never been there. Like a spell had lifted. And I'd chosen to stay awake. I didn't sleep. The journal stayed on the table. The photo went into the fire. The lights stayed on. But nothing came. Because maybe for the first time it didn't need to. The thread didn't vanish. It just changed. And I changed with it. Morning came slowly. It didn't break like a dramatic curtain call. It seeped in quietly like something unsure of its place. The windows held pale light like a secret, and the shadows on the floor lost their edges. The house didn't feel safer in the daylight, but it felt acknowledged. I hadn't slept, not even dozed, but I didn't feel tired. I felt alert, like a thread pulled tight. The journal still lay open on the kitchen table, and my last words were right where I'd left them. I don't choose silence. I don't choose forgetting. I choose the thread. That sentence, it didn't feel brave. It didn't feel noble. It felt necessary. I stood up and went to the window again. The yard looked unchanged. The car was still in the driveway. The world still pretended nothing was wrong. But I knew better. Because I could feel it now, that presence, not as a haunting, but as a current running beneath everything. Like a frequency only I had tuned into. And I wasn't sure if that meant I was marked or chosen. Around 800 a.m., the doorbell rang. I jumped. The sound was jarring, almost absurdly ordinary. When I opened the door, a woman stood there. Late 30s, short brown hair, wearing a wool coat and holding a manila envelope. She looked familiar. Not her, not the woman with the umbrella. Someone else. Eleanor Morgan, she asked. I nodded slowly. I'm with the county archives, she said, handing over the envelope. This was scheduled for release today under a deferred release order tied to your family name. You're the last known descendant. I stared at the envelope. Release order. She shrugged. It's rare. Sometimes there's sealed property or family notes that only get unsealed at a certain time or condition. What condition? Just says on January 20th, after 4:00 a.m. upon personal retrieval. That's all I know. She turned and walked away without another word. I stood in the doorway holding the envelope like it might burn me. And then I closed the door and brought it inside. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside, a thick stack of papers, mostly photocopies of letters, articles, and property records. But on top, a handwritten note. Old ink faded to rust. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. Ellie. If you're reading this, then you've remembered what I never had the strength to. I'm sorry I buried it all in silence. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now the thread doesn't cut it coils. The lake, the journal, the woman. She's not evil. She's what's left when too many people forget. She's the ledger. You were always going to see her again. Just promise me you'll write it down. Whatever you see next, don't let it disappear with you. I pressed the note to my chest and closed my eyes. For years, my mother had walked around with this truth folded inside her like a blade tucked into her ribcage, and she'd left it for me to open. Not to suffer it, but to finish it. The documents were meticulous. Property transfers from Pine Hollow. Reports of disappearances that matched the 20th of various months. Handwritten witness accounts about a silent woman in black near bodies of water. Dozens of names. None remembered now. All untraceable. And there toward the bottom of the stack a photograph. The oldest one yet. Dated 1913. A group of women standing near a lake dressed in mourning clothes. And behind them, just barely visible in the background. Her. Umbrella. Unmoving. Unaging. Witness. I couldn't sit still after that. I dressed quickly, packed the journal and a camera, and got back in the car. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I had to move. I had to go back. Not to Pine Hollow, something deeper than that. Something buried. I drove toward the mountains. Not toward any destination I could name, but toward something pulling at my center. And the further I drove, the more I felt it. Like gravity. Like memory sharpening its claws. At one point I pulled over just to breathe, and there, under a canopy of frost-bitten pines, I saw her, just standing among the trees. Not close, not threatening, just there. Like always. Waiting. This time I didn't approach. I didn't speak. I took out my camera and snapped a photo. Then another. And another. She didn't move. The lens fogged slightly with my breath, but I didn't stop. 3 more photos. Then she turned, and slowly walked deeper into the trees, out of sight, but not gone, never gone. Back in the car, I reviewed the photos. Every one of them was black. Not blurry, black. As though light itself had refused to record her. But when I zoomed in, a line of white, thin, curved, the outline of an umbrella. Just that. No face, no shadow, just proof. Not for anyone else. For me. I drove home before dark, and when I stepped back into my house, the air felt different. Settled. The journal glowed with presence even though it was closed, and I knew what I had to do. I sat down and began to write again. But this time it wasn't about Mark. It wasn't even about her. It was about me. The girl at the lake. The woman in the kitchen. The witness and the thread and the silence that never belonged to me. And as I wrote, the house didn't creak. The lights didn't flicker. The photo didn't appear. Because sometimes when you finally tell the truth, the haunting doesn't vanish. It rests. The next morning, I received a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was short, 7 seconds, maybe 8. A voice said, "She is not done. The thread moves, because you do." That was it. No name. No return call. I played it 4 times. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't my mother's or Mark's. It sounded like someone caught between 2 radio frequencies, distorted, layered like a warning wrapped inside a memory. But I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt inevitability. I made myself tea, opened the journal again, and began reviewing what I'd written over the past few days. My entries weren't just records. They were transformations. And I could see it clearly now. I was no longer the woman waiting for answers. I had become the one holding them. But with answers came responsibility. And a choice. Let it end with me. Or make it begin. That evening, I drove to a storage unit I hadn't visited in over 10 years. It still had my mother's name on the lease, but I kept the key mostly out of guilt. After she passed, I never had the heart to clean it out. Just paid the bill every year quietly, automatically. Inside dust settled on everything like snow. Old furniture, plastic bins of photos, boxes marked attic, fragile, and one trunk, locked with a rusted padlock. I remembered this trunk. It had sat in our basement when I was little. I used to ask what was inside, and my mother would always say the same thing: "Nothing that belongs in your head." That day, I broke the lock with a crowbar. Inside journals. Dozens of them. All written in her handwriting. Each one marked by date like chapters of a life she never told anyone she was writing. I flipped open the earliest one. The first page read, "I saw her again last night. The woman with the umbrella. She stood outside the hospital room where my father died. She didn't speak. She never does. But I know she's waiting for me or for Ellie, or maybe not waiting at all. Maybe I'm just remembering something I shouldn't have forgotten. I spent hours sitting on the cold cement floor flipping through those pages. Patterns began to emerge. Every 20th, every lake, every loss. It wasn't just our family. It went further back. Aunt Sheila, Grandfather Thomas, cousins I never met. The same dates, the same disappearances. Some were written off as accidents. Others simply went quiet. But all of them had described her. In different ways. Always with reverence. Never with blame. And all of them wrote. Some even suggested it was the only thing that had kept them whole. The act of witnessing back. The act of threading yourself into truth. I took the journals with me, loaded them into my trunk like I was rescuing sacred artifacts, because that's what they were. Proof not just that I wasn't alone, but that this thing, this memory, this haunting had never been a curse. It had been an invitation, the kind only a few people ever hear, and fewer still answer. Back home, I created a new shelf in my office, labeled it Unforgotten. Every one of her journals went there, and then beside them I placed mine, the green one. I wasn't sure if that made it a shrine or a warning, but it felt right. That night I wrote again. I wrote about the photograph in the fire, about Mark on the stairs, about the woman in the woods, about the journal with my name carved into it. I didn't write to explain. I wrote to record, to keep her present in ink. Because I was starting to understand that's what she was. She wasn't death. She wasn't memory. She was what rose when silence wins. She was the shape we see in the fog when we forget who we are. But when we write, when we remember, she waits, and then walks away. I stayed up late that night. Not afraid, not expectant, just open. Every light in the house stayed on, not out of fear, but as witness. I placed one of my mother's journals by my bedside, and as I drifted to sleep, I imagined her voice reading it to me, telling me softly, "You did what I couldn't. You looked back. You didn't close your eyes." And then just before the edge of sleep took me, I saw her again, standing at the lake, not at the edge, in the water. No umbrella, just open hands, waiting. Not for me, but for what came next. On the morning of January 21st, I opened a fresh notebook. Not the green journal, the sacred one was finished. Closed. Its spine now sat on the shelf among my mother's entries as if it had always belonged there. This new notebook was plain, black cover, unmarked pages. I needed it to be empty, because I wasn't writing about the past anymore. I was writing what would be. But I hadn't even written the first sentence when the doorbell rang. I froze. For a brief second, I felt that old pulse of fear, that jolt in the chest, the expectation that she had returned. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw someone I never expected. A boy, no older than 12. Alone. Thin coat. A little too short for him. Eyes like storm clouds that had forgotten how to cry. I opened the door slowly. "Can I help you?" I asked. He didn't smile, didn't flinch. Instead, he said, "My grandmother told me to find you if it ever happened again." My blood chilled. "Who's your grandmother?" I whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. Not handed it, held it. For me to see. It was a woman mid-50s standing beside a river, and behind her, far in the background, partially obscured by trees, the curve of an umbrella. I let him inside. He sat at the table like he belonged there, like he had always been meant to arrive at that moment. His hands were folded neatly on the surface. He didn't fidget. He didn't ask for food. He just waited. "She told me to come if the light flickered 3 times, he said. "When did that happen last night? And your parents?" He looked down. "It's just me and Grandma." I exhaled slowly. "What's your name, Micah?" He didn't offer a last name. Didn't need to. Because I recognized something in his face. Something familiar. Not by blood. By thread. I poured us both tea. He didn't touch his. I didn't ask why. He slid the photo across the table. "I think she's gone," he said. "But I don't think it's permanent." "What makes you say that?" She said. "If it happens on the 20th, it's never about death. It's about memory." That's what she told me. I stared at him. His voice, the cadence, it reminded me of me at that age. Quiet. Aware. Holding too many secrets for a child. She said you'd know what to do. I looked toward the shelf where the journal sat. "Yes," I said. "I do." I showed him the green book. I let him read the page where I had declared my refusal to forget. He didn't say anything, just nodded. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded piece of notebook paper. It read, "Micah. If you're reading this in someone else's kitchen, I'm sorry. That means I couldn't finish what I started. But she'll help you. Her name is Eleanor Morgan." She saw the thread. She held it. I closed my eyes. This woman, Micah's grandmother, had been part of it too. One of us. Another silent witness walking quietly through the world. And now she was gone. No, not yet. Not if we remembered. "I need to ask you something," I said. He looked up. "Have you seen her? The woman with the umbrella?" He nodded slowly. "Once. After my mom died. She was standing in the corner of my room. Just standing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I thought she was going to take me. But she didn't. She just watched." I leaned forward. "That means you're not alone. It means you're tied in. It means you remember." "Is that bad?" I smiled softly. "It means you're awake." We sat in silence for a while. I wrote in my new notebook. He drew spirals on a napkin. Later, I showed him how to date an entry. How to describe not just what happened, but what moved inside of him. He picked it up quickly. Too quickly. Like this had always been waiting inside him too. By nightfall, I gave him his own notebook. Micah held it with a kind of reverence that made me want to cry. "I don't know if she's coming back," he said. "My grandma. She doesn't have to. She's not gone." I pointed to the shelf. "She's just written." At midnight, the lights flickered. Micah didn't panic. He just looked at me and asked, "Should I write this down?" And I smiled because I knew the thread was no longer just a burden. It was becoming a lineage. Not of blood, of memory. And Micah, this boy with storm-colored eyes and quiet courage, was already part of it. Just like I had been. Just like my mother. Just like her. We didn't speak again that night. We just wrote. Two writers, two witnesses. Threading our truths into the world so they'd never be forgotten again. The 22nd arrived with fog. It curled around the edges of the windows like it was looking for a way in, searching for cracks in the glass, or maybe in us. Micah was still asleep on the living room couch, curled under a knitted throw. He hadn't stirred once during the night. The notebook he'd started lay open on the coffee table. His last sentence written in deliberate block letters, "I'm not scared if I remember." I stood in the kitchen holding my mother's last journal in one hand and my own in the other. There was a symmetry now, a line drawn across generations not broken by silence this time, but sewn together by words. The light above the kitchen sink flickered once, then stayed on. No shadows moved in the hallway, no umbrella hung in the air. Just stillness and clarity. Because I knew now the woman with the umbrella didn't come for those who were dying. She came for those who were disappearing, piece by piece. Word by unsaid word, memory by memory, until they vanished from their own stories. But if you remembered, if you wrote. She paused. She waited. And sometimes she left. I went outside just after sunrise. Micah still slept wrapped in the comfort of something deeper than blankets witnessed safety. The fog was thinning. The frost on the porch railing melted beneath my fingers. Across the yard I saw it. Not a figure, not a silhouette. Just a shape in the grass. An umbrella. Closed. Left behind. A final offering. A surrender. Or maybe a trade. I picked it up. Its handle was smooth. Worn down. Familiar. It felt like it had been waiting for my hands. But the moment I touched it, I felt the thread. Not pulling me. Not wrapping around me. Settling. Like something that had finally been returned to its rightful place. I didn't tell Micah right away. Instead, I brought the umbrella inside and set it gently next to the journals. It belonged there now. Part of the archive. Part of us. When Micah woke, he rubbed his eyes and looked around like he wasn't sure if it had all been a dream. But then he saw the umbrella. And nodded. Not in surprise. In understanding. "Is she gone?" he asked. "No," I said, sitting down beside him. "She's just not waiting anymore." He leaned his head on my shoulder. We sat there in silence, two survivors not of horror, but of forgetting. Two threads that didn't break. Just rewove. Weeks passed. Micah stayed with me until his grandmother was found alive. Wandering dazed on the outskirts of a trail near a river in another state. She had no memory of how she got there. No injuries. Just emptied. But when I visited her and she saw me, her hand trembled. "You saw her?" she whispered. "I wrote her," I said. She smiled, slow and weary. "Then we're free. I've started a new journal now. Not a ledger of loss or a catalog of echoes. Just life. Mine. Micah's. The people who write back. There are others now. They send letters. Scanned journal pages. Stories of 20th days and quiet disappearances and light flickers no one else notices. They sign their names with 2 words. Thread held. And I know what that means. They remember. Like I do. Like you might. If you've ever lost something and couldn't explain why. If you've ever seen a woman in the corner of your eye holding an umbrella no one else noticed. You're not haunted. You're being asked to remember. So write it down. Don't let it vanish. Don't become a silence. Become a witness. Become the thread. Thank you for listening. If you've ever felt something invisible pulling at the edges of your life like a shadow that's not quite a shadow, maybe now you understand why. And if you've seen her or felt her watching, know this: you're not alone. You're written. You're held.